Hey, I'm Wes, the Explosion, this is the Backlog, and this week I tackled The Wild at Heart by Moonlight Kids on the Switch. In it, a kid named Wake runs away from home. As he's looking for his friend Kirby in the woods where they're supposed to meet up, he falls into a magical section of the forest typically blocked off from the secular world, a la Alice in Wonderland. Here he meets an old man who's a green shield, a defender of the woods, and the world at large from an encroaching darkness, who enlists Wake's aid in his cause, and soon Wake is introduced to a type of creature called Spritelings. Spritelings are the game's main draw and where much of the Pikmin comparison comes from, because this game seems very Pikmin inspired. There are 5 different types, but each of them can work together to carry objects, weigh down pressure switches, destroy breakable objects, and fight enemies. The first you get kinda remind me of onions, and can deal with poisonous objects and enemies, and be used to grow some plant-based platforms. The second are fire-based, and can thus deal with fire-based problems and burn down thorn bushes. When night falls, some extra nasty enemies spawn in and follow you around, but the lunar-themed Spritelings can not only fight them off, they also get stronger at night and can activate crystals that create safe spaces and can also clear away corruption from terrain to make it safe to pass. The spiked Spritelings can be thrown to cause damage on impact and also break hard crystals, as well as stick to some objects to weigh them down. And finally, the ice ones deal with ice things. They can make partially frozen paths solid so that you can cross, and do this weird thing with a type of ice tree where they create smaller doppelgangers at a nearby spot that you wouldn't typically be able to get them to. Did I explain all those well enough? Anyway, you expand how many you can have in the field at once as you progress through the game, and if you're running low on a type, you can get more by breaking gourds to get seeds and this glowy type of currency that you spend to hatch said seeds. As for the player, Wake can throw the Spritelings to direct them, and kick to do a bit of damage to things himself. He also has a vacuum pack, which can suck up collectibles and trash and recall Spritelings, as well as turn pinwheels which function like switches, and pull over some objects, like rotting trees, to create new paths. The pack has a stronger setting if you either want to go faster, or the basic suckage just isn't enough, though doing this for too long causes it to overheat and you'll have to wait for it to cool off again. And remember how I said Wake was looking for a friend in the beginning of the game? Not too far into things, she shows up and lends a hand. Kirby is a bit smaller than Wake and can thus fit into tight spaces to reach spots that he cannot. And instead of the backpack, she gets a magical lantern. This has a good deal of the same functions, sucking up objects and Spritelings, but instead of being able to mess with pinwheels and knock some stuff over, she has her own equivalents, activating magic statues and clearing up sources of corruption. While her smaller size does give Kirby more functionality, this is largely used to split them up so that they can tackle a puzzle together from different angles and assure that each character is in the right spot. The puzzles are balanced pretty well so that neither character feels more helpful than the other, and throughout my playthrough, I would typically use whichever character I had needed to solve the last puzzle with, rather than show a preference to one or the other. You can either separate the pair to control each individually, or have one tag along with the other, following behind like the Spritelings do. While what you're trying to accomplish will largely determine which style you use, there are a few things to watch out for. While separate, you can't leave an area or rest at camp, so you never want to be too far away from each other. And while together, you only directly control one character, so if you're getting attacked and you dodge, your secondary character might still get hit. I didn't get knocked out too many times in this game, maybe around a half dozen, and at least 2 of these came from this, so it's definitely something to be wary of. As you'd probably expect, there's a fair bit to collect in this game. There are of course the Spriteling seeds and the glowing orbs you use to hatch them, as well as expand how many you can have out at once. There are several cats trapped in boxes scattered about the land, and talking to their owner after doing so nets you a bunch of these orbs, which is very nice. For the first half of the game, you need to reassemble the green shields that are off on individual missions, and for the second half, you have to gather up a number of sacred items that you can use to defeat the darkness. There are also a lot of items scattered about that you can collect, mostly for the sake of collecting, to put into a gallery, stuff like an old bicycle and disco ball. Having your Spritelings carry them back to base does net you some scrap and items as well. Scrap is the other main currency in the game. You use it to buy items and materials, as well as expand some facilities at your base. Other than those improvements though, I don't think I used scrap once, and even if I had, you find scrap so easily just by interacting with the environment that being rewarded with a bunch is, ironically, not very rewarding. finding cats is much more worthwhile. As for materials, you use these to craft stuff, like food to heal or items to help you survive nighttime. This was another system I didn't really use, and that's due to the biggest complaint I have with the game, the inventory system. In the beginning with Wake, you have 6 slots, and once you get Kirby, that expands to 8. Some items, like seeds, you can stack up to 10 for a slot, whereas better items, like the one that makes you drop less currency if you get KO'd, takes up a spot all on its own. I was constantly running back and forth between my base to drop off materials, though given that I only really ever used the seeds, I'm not sure why I bothered. There were more blocked off rows in my inventory, so maybe I just missed the way to expand it, but when I tried looking it up, I couldn't find anything on it either. The crafting system is user-friendly enough, letting you use materials that are in storage as well as physically on you, and it'll only let you use stuff that will successfully make something, rather than failing and wasting items. Still though, I only used crafting when I was trying to find out a way to expand my inventory, and before the final boss, when I wanted at least a few healing items to take in with me. As for how the game looks, just see for yourself. The visuals are charming and remind me of a storybook. The human characters are designed well enough to give you a feel for their personality, whereas the Spritelings and enemies are simple but with clear elements to tell you their utility and how to deal with them. The music is pleasant, being more atmospheric and setting the mood rather than being too intrusive or hyping you up. Think the sort of thing that you would listen to while studying. The storytelling is also really well done. In the beginning, it's used to naturally introduce you to gameplay elements, and overall, it manages to be engaging without being intrusive. It never feels like it's stopping the action for too long. It does a good job with foreshadowing and dropping hints that, while many can probably guess the plot's twist, it still keeps you curious. One thing that I found a little weird though is that the game swears about 3 times. And don't get me wrong, I don't mind cursing in media. It just felt a little out of place since this game seems to be going for a more fun for all ages demographic, and with how little they do it, I have to wonder if it's worth it since it could turn off some more puritanical parents. Then again, maybe those types would have already labeled the game witchcraft for its magical elements. Now that I've reinforced the good, let's talk about the bad. The combat is really simple, you just kinda throw your Spritelings at a target and let them do the rest. You can throw your spiked guys for extra damage, a few foes fly so you need to knock them down first, and sometimes you have to match elements, but that's about as complex as it gets. The other issue with combat is that it's really unclear what kills your Spritelings. Sometimes attacks just knock them down, and sometimes they give up the ghost. I couldn't tell whether Spritelings have unseen HP, or whether some attacks are just fatal and some are not. The final boss is really rough. You're attacking Spritelings just dying after they do so much damage to the boss. The game does spawn extra guys in for you, which does mitigate this, but I have to wonder why they made it work like this in the first place. I had a bad time with this fight besides that, due to a combination of not watching my health enough and getting randomly hit with rocks that the boss just drops. Other than the last fight though, I don't think I would have minded the basic combat so much if it wasn't hard not to compare this game to Pikmin. Pikmin divided its focus between puzzles, time management, and battle, and did all really well, whereas The Wild at Heart concentrates largely on puzzles, with time management being negligible, and combat being put more on the back burner. In a bubble, doing this is perfectly fine, and in no way a flaw, but like I said, it's hard not to think about how fun and strategy-based it was in Pikmin, and feel like The Wild at Heart is lacking. In a similar fashion, after playing Pikmin 3 last year, it's also a bit of a bummer that this game doesn't allow multiplayer, or for you to direct your secondary character to head to a location while you work on something else. It's what makes taking inspiration from a game such a double-edged sword. On one hand, you have a built-in fanbase, it can be easy to recommend if you do a good job, and it can fill a hole if the original series is in a bit of a lull. On the other hand, if you don't do something as well as the other game, even if that's not your main focus, it can lead to some bad comparisons. If I was not familiar with Pikmin, all the complaints I have would have been the inventory, the final boss, and nitpicks. Overall, I think this game is terrific. It does enough to distinguish itself with its story, setting, added mechanics, and greater focus on puzzles that I would call it Pikmin-inspired instead of a Pikmin ripoff, and would recommend it not only to fans of that series, but gamers in general. I've never heard of Moonlight Kids, and can't find anything else on them besides this game, so if this is the first thing they've made, that's really impressive. If they make a sequel or something similar and just sand off some of the rough edges, I think they go from something great to something spectacular. As for me personally, I played on the higher difficulty setting because I read that the lower one was too easy. I thought the puzzles were pretty reasonable, me only needing to look up a solution once, and it turned out how I thought it was solved was right, I just didn't commit hard enough. Since I didn't use items much, I would always rest at camp when night fell, to swap back to the much safer daytime and heal up. I had a very pleasant time 90% of the game, which led to the odd effect of me noticing the hiccups even more than I would have had the game been bad or mediocre. Every time the normally good pathfinding got a little goofy or a puzzle required more running around than thinking, it was a little jarring, whereas with a crappy game it would have just been par for the course. It makes me look forward even more to what Moonlight Kids does next, assuming this game does well enough to justify it. Did I mention that I recommend The Wild at Heart? And I don't like Mega Man 11 because it makes me feel bad. As you might be aware, I've been trying to play through all the mainline Mega Man titles on stream, and last night was 11's turn. I remember having a good bit of trouble with it when it originally came out, but I figured it was mostly because I was out of practice, but no, this game is just really dang hard. I only played a few levels, but Blockman's has a ton of conveyor belts and falling boxes, as well as his powered up boss form taking up about a fourth of the screen while blocking half of it behind him. Acid Man's stage is covered in spikes. Impact Man's requires you to run around on slow-moving platforms, while enemies take potshots at you, and at one point, the boss themselves step in to assault you with his 3 parts to continually attack you, and hopefully you can dodge. If not, you'll get knocked back down a floor or two and have to ride back up again, all while still getting rushed. A lot of the enemy placement is also pretty mean. A lot of them are in hard-to-hit places that require you to do some maneuvering to hit, all while dancing around their attacks. There are also just so dang many of them. Since this title was on modern consoles, they didn't have to worry about the slowdown it would cause if they put too much on screen, like on the NES. There were several times I would dodge about and counter 3 enemies, only to have a 4th that my attention just didn't extend to hit me instead. And despite this upgrade in processing power, I swear the game would still sometimes do the thing where it would respawn an enemy if its origin point went off screen for a split second. There was one time in particular where I had to contend with a missile from a construction cone I'd just killed. Some of this stuff can be mitigated by using the double gear system, which allows you to either slow down time or power up your attacks, and while some may say this makes the game too easy, I'd argue that they actively factored this into their level and enemy designs. All that said, how long you can use it at a time is limited, and it's not the end-all be-all, so some of these things are still issues even with this. I think my biggest issue might be with the difficulty settings, which actively gaslight you. There are 4 different levels, which options are always great, and this allows a wider range of people to enjoy the game. The first is Newcomer, for those new to the series. The second is Casual, for those that are out of practice. The third is Normal, for returning fans, and the last, Superhero, for hardcore players. Or at least that's the gist as the game tells it. I played it both this time and the first on normal, and like I said, on my original run, I just assumed I was out of practice and this was the standard for the series, but no, this is harder. I can beat most classic games in around 2 hours, but here it took me around an hour just to beat one stage, and that was after abandoning the level I thought it would be best off beating first. I don't think I'd call the game unfair, but it certainly has high expectations, and I shudder to think about what Superhero would be like. I don't begrudge them for making things this hard, and they give enough options that it doesn't have to be if you don't want it to be. But I kinda resent it labeling normal as the standard for the series when it's not. I just played through 8 of the previous games so I can directly compare them. It gets even weirder when you look into what other people have said about the game. The reviews are largely positive, though there are a few that complain about the difficulty. Makes sense, but then there are people who reply back that they actually thought this game was easier than the previous ones. This is where I get confused. Maybe these people were playing on lower difficulties. Maybe they got really good with the double gear. Maybe the game and the rest just test different skills, and that's where this disconnect is coming from. Or maybe these are the type of people who could get the crap beat out of them by a group of folks and then claim to have felt nothing afterwards, even while coughing up blood and collecting their teeth. No one thinks you're cool, you just look stupid. Either way, most advice for getting better at the game involved just learning the levels and compensating against bosses by using E-tanks, which were always options, they just seem much more imperative here. Either way, it didn't take long for me to get fed up with the game and just kinda rage quit. I I did still beat it on stream though. Don't ask me how, there'll be a video in a few days, you'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll probably judge me a bit, but a win is a win. 11 did completely destroy my confidence though, and I'm not sure how to get it back. Maybe I'll play another Mega Man game I know I can destroy on air next week. Maybe I'll just do X or X4 on my own again, or maybe I'll play through 11 on casual to get the basics down, then try to stream normal again, but either way, labeling normal is a frickin' lie. If we use that as the standard, I'd say this is easily the hardest classic game I've played, with only 7 coming somewhat close, and that's only because of the final boss. Capcom are poopy heads because they made me feel sad. That brings the backlog down to 108. Work's about to start sapping more of my time due to some questionable decisions, so I might have to slow down on streaming, but I'm hoping to still do 4 videos a week here. Just don't be surprised if more poetry starts showing up or I start sounding kinda drained. For now though, thanks for watching, maybe subscribe for more informal reviews and Mega Man content, and perhaps I'll see you in the next one.